There are moments in Hollywood history where a single choice shatters an entire life, but none were as explosive, as devastating, or as irreversible as the night Lee Marvin, the legendary silver screen soldier, the man who stared down death on Saipan and villains on camera, whispered two words that would cost him $3.6 million, destroy his legacy, and haunt him until his final breath. Get out. It happened in the darkest corner of a Malibu bedroom, on a night thick with tension and betrayal. Michelle Triola stood trembling in the doorway, mascara streaked down her cheeks like black rain. A suitcase was slipping from her hand, as if even it could no longer hold the weight of the truth. Lee, please. But the toughest man in Hollywood, the fighter who had outlived bullets, bar brawls, and decades of stardom, wouldn't even look at her. He just stood by the window, staring into the ocean, like the waves could wash away 6 years of love, sacrifice, and promises never written, but always believed. You lived in my house, you spent my money, and you played my girlfriend, he said. The suitcase hit the floor with a crack, sharp, loud, unforgiving. I changed my name for you, Lee. I became Michelle Marvin for you. That was your choice. Silence. Then came the 5 words that would reshape Hollywood law, terrify every bachelor actor, and ignite an 8-year war. Then I'll see you in court. That moment, October 15th, 1970, marked the beginning of a legal battle no studio could ignore, no actor could escape, and no relationship could survive. And it all started with 2 people who loved each other, and ended with 2 people who destroyed each other. April 18th, 1979. After 3 months of testimony, 60 witnesses, thousands of pages of evidence, and a decade of emotional warfare, the courtroom of Department 57 was filled to the brim. Reporters stood shoulder to shoulder. Lawyers gripped their pens. Spectators leaned forward, holding their breath. Lee Marvin looked like a man waiting for his own execution. Michelle Triola looked like a woman praying for a miracle. Judge Arthur Marshall lifted the ruling. The room went silent. I have reviewed all the evidence, he began. I have heard all testimony. His voice echoed, measured, slow, almost mournful. This case raises questions with no clear precedent. He glanced at Michelle, at Lee, then continued. On the matter of an oral or implied contract, he paused. I find that no valid contract existed between the parties. Michelle's face shattered. Her eyes filled instantly with tears. Her hands trembled violently. Lee exhaled for the first time in what felt like years. He began to rise, believing it was over. Then the judge spoke again. However, that single word froze everyone. However, I also find that Miss Triola suffered significant economic injury as a result of the relationship. She gave up employment opportunities. She provided services, companionship, homemaking, emotional support that possess real value. The courtroom buzzed with confusion. Therefore, he said firmly, I award Miss Triola $14,000 for rehabilitation and retraining. Silence, then chaos. Reporters scribbled furiously. Lawyers exchanged stunned glances. It was a judgment that satisfied no one. Michelle sued for $3.6 million and received $14,000. Lee won the case, but was ordered to pay anyway. Hollywood wanted clarity and got a loophole that changed everything. Michelle whispered, trembling, $14,000? 6 years of my life is worth $14,000? Lee muttered under his breath. I feel broke. I feel old. I feel done. The truth? No one won. Michelle's legal bills were $180,000. The $14,000 didn't even scratch the surface. She walked away buried in debt, her career destroyed forever. Lee's legal fees totaled $213,000, more than 15 times what he owed Michelle. Hollywood panicked. Studios began requiring contracts for couples living together. Agents warned their clients. The word palimony entered the American dictionary, even though the judge had rejected the contract claim entirely. Michelle appealed and lost again in 1981. The verdict was final. Their war was over, but the damage had already been done. Michelle never acted again, never married, never recovered. She lived the rest of her life in obscurity, surviving on Social Security. Lee's life wasn't much better. The trial poisoned his marriage. His drinking worsened. His PTSD roared back. He worked, but in smaller, less meaningful roles. His reputation forever tied to the lawsuit, not his talent. 2 people, 6 years of love, 8 years of war, $400,000 in combined legal fees, $14,000 awarded, 0 winners. This wasn't a trial, it was a tragedy. And it wasn't finished yet, because years later, on his deathbed, Lee Marvin would make a final confession, one that would reopen every wound both of them tried to bury. After the verdict, after the headlines faded, after Hollywood moved on to its next scandal, Lee Marvin and Michelle Triola were left alone with the ruins of what they once were. Their lives drifted apart, but their ghosts remained tied together. For Lee, the aftermath was brutal. His marriage to Pamela barely survived, not because he still loved Michelle, but because the trial consumed him from the inside out. "I married a movie star," Pamela would later say, but the courtroom turned him into a haunted man. His PTSD from Saipan returned with a vengeance. Nightmares, drinking, insomnia, guilt he refused to name but could never outrun. His career declined. Studios no longer saw him as Hollywood's toughest man, just the actor from that palimony case. And then came the final blow, pancreatic cancer, 1985. Doctors gave him months. He fought for 2 years. And in his final days, lying in room 447 at Tucson Medical Center, Lee Marvin did something no one expected. He made a tape. It was supposed to be a private rant, a list of 6 enemies he claimed had wronged him in Hollywood. John Wayne, Charles Bronson, Steve McQueen, Clint Eastwood, James Coburn, Robert Mitchum. But when he finished the 6th name, a strange silence filled the room. He asked his son, Christopher, turn the recorder back on. His voice was weak, ragged from morphine, age, regret. "There's one more," he whispered, and then he said her name, Michelle. The air seemed to stop moving. His words came slow, slurred, but painfully honest. Of all the fights he had, this was the only one where nobody won. He admitted he might have made promises. He admitted he might have meant them. He admitted memory plays tricks. But he remembered one thing clearly. She gave up her career. Maybe she didn't have much of one. But she gave up whatever chance she had. For me. A long pause. And what did I give her? 6 years in a nice house? And then I threw her out like nothing. His voice trembled. Not from illness, but remorse. She took my name. She took my name, and I let her, because saying no was harder than letting her believe the lie. He swallowed hard. We could have settled for 50,000, 100, anything. Instead, we went to war. His voice cracked. I owed her more, not money, an apology. Then came the line that would haunt anyone who heard it. "I'm sorry, Michelle, not for leaving. You can't force love, but for the cruelty." His breath weakened. "Tell her. If she ever asks, tell her Lee Marvin said he was sorry." The tape clicked off. 3 days later, August 29th, 1987, Lee Marvin died. His last word, according to the nurse, was finally closure. But the story wasn't finished, because 8 years later, in 1995, Christopher Marvin found Michelle in her small apartment and played the tape for her. She listened quietly, tears running down her cheeks. When it ended, she whispered, "It doesn't change anything, but thank you." Then she sat alone, remembering a beach house, remembering promises, remembering the 6 years that defined her life and destroyed it. Michelle Triola died in 2009. At 75, her obituary was a single paragraph. The headline, "Michelle Triola Marvin, known for the Lee Marvin palimony case, dies at 75. Not actress, not performer, just the woman who sued Lee Marvin. 2 lives, 6 years of love, 8 years of war, one apology that came decades too late. And in the end, both died alone, broken by the love they couldn't keep and the war they couldn't win." When the dust finally settled, when the reporters moved on, when the court transcripts yellowed with age, and when both Lee Marvin and Michelle Triola had faded into the quiet corners of memory, Hollywood was left with a legacy neither of them intended to leave behind, a legacy written not in awards nor in box office records, but in heartbreak, litigation, and the silent aftermath of choices made too late. Their story left scars on Lee's reputation, on Michelle's life, on Hollywood's legal landscape, and on every couple who dared to build a life together without a marriage license. Because after their war, Hollywood was never the same. Studios began requiring cohabitation agreements. Agents warned clients, "Don't move in together without paperwork." Actors, directors, producers, everyone recalculated risk, love, trust. The word palimony entered the American dictionary because of a lawsuit that didn't even grant it. For the first time in history, the entertainment industry understood that love, when tangled with fame, money, and power, could become a legal battlefield with no victors. But beneath the legal precedent was something far more human. 2 people loved each other. 2 people broke each other. 2 people spent a decade fighting for something neither could ever truly win. Lee Marvin survived bullets, explosions, bar fights, and one of the bloodiest battles of World War II. But the one fight he couldn't survive, the one opponent he could not defeat, was the woman who once held him together at night when the nightmares came. And Michelle, she spent the last years of her life in a small apartment, lonely but dignified, never remarried, never reclaimed her career, never escaped the shadow of a lawsuit she filed out of heartbreak, desperation, and the hope that the law might validate the 6 years she gave away. In the end, those years were reduced to 6 years of love, 8 years of war, $3.6 million demanded, $14,000 awarded, $400,000 lost to lawyers, 2 destroyed lives, and a single whispered apology on a tape recorder. And that apology was the closest thing either ever got to peace. Not justice, not reconciliation, just honesty 4 decades too late. Hollywood has its legends, its heroes, its scandals, but few stories reveal the truth behind the glamour like this one. A story where love wasn't enough, where pride did the killing, where no one walked away whole. A story where the toughest man in Hollywood was undone not by an enemy, but by a woman who once believed every promise he made. And in the end, beneath the fame, the headlines, the lawsuits, Lee Marvin and Michelle Triola were just 2 broken hearts trying and failing to save each other. Some battles don't have winners. This was one of them. To understand how Lee Marvin and Michelle Triola tore each other apart, you must first understand how fate, quiet, unassuming, almost gentle, brought them together. It was the early days of Columbia Pictures on the set of Ship of Fools. Lee Marvin was 40 years old, grizzled, hung over more often than sober, and trapped in Hollywood's habit of typecasting him as the heavy, the villain, the man with violence simmering just beneath the skin, a killer who could act, an actor who had actually killed. Everyone knew his edge wasn't invented, it was inherited from the war. Michelle Triola was 30, beautiful, disciplined, and desperately chasing a career Hollywood refused to hand her. Bit parts, background roles, a name that casting directors forgot as soon as she left the room. A woman who knew her lines perfectly, yet disappeared into the credits anyway. No one, and I mean no one, approached Lee Marvin casually. He was a man people admired from a distance, feared up close, and never interrupted. But Michelle did the impossible. One afternoon during lunch, she walked straight to his table and sat down without an invitation. "You're not as scary as everyone says," she said. Lee looked up slowly, those pale, icy eyes that could silence a room, fixed on her. And then he laughed. "Give me time, sweetheart. I'll prove them right." "I don't think so," she replied with a teasing grin. "Scary men don't eat tuna sandwiches." For the first time in weeks, he stopped pretending he didn't care about anything. He asked her name. "Michelle Triola." "Italian?" "My father was. My mother made me drop the name, said it was too ethnic for Hollywood." "Your mother was wrong," Lee said. "Never change your name for this town." 3 months later, she would ignore that advice completely. Soon, the set noticed their connection. Lee lingered during Michelle's scenes. Michelle somehow walked past his trailer 3, 4, 5 times a day. Crew members whispered. Vivian Lee herself remarked to her makeup artist, "That Marvin man is going to ruin that girl or save her. I just don't know which." By December 1964, Michelle had moved into Lee's Malibu beach house. By April 1965, she stopped auditioning entirely. And by September 1965, she did the one thing no one, not Lee, not her friends, not Hollywood, expected. She legally changed her name to Michelle Triola Marvin. Not married, not engaged, just claimed him. And Lee Marvin, Hollywood's toughest man, let her. For a while, it felt like they saved each other. The years between 1965 and 1969 would later be remembered by both Lee Marvin and Michelle Triola as the golden period, the only time in their story where love, routine, and purpose aligned perfectly. Before it all began to rot beneath the surface, for Lee, Michelle wasn't just a girlfriend. She was a stabilizing force, an anchor he clung to when his war nightmares clawed their way back into the bedroom, when the old shrapnel in his leg shifted painfully, when the alcohol blurred the line between the man he was and the soldier he used to be. Michelle was there for all of it, not because she had to, but because she believed she was building a life with him, day by day, wound by wound, victory by victory. She traveled with him everywhere. Morocco for the professionals, England for the dirty dozen, Oregon for paint your wagon. Always introduced as my girl. Sometimes, after a little too much wine at dinner parties, as my wife, that would later matter, a lot when the courtroom lights came on. Witnesses remembered it vividly. 12 different people would testify that Lee Marvin used phrases like, "my wife," "we'll marry when the time is right," And why do we need a piece of paper when we already have this? And Michelle believed every word, because in those golden years, Lee made her feel something she'd never felt before. Like I came home from the war, he once told a friend. Finally. But what no one tells you, what Michelle didn't understand yet, is that when someone becomes your peace, you give them a dangerous kind of power. And in Hollywood, power always comes with consequences. By the middle of 1966, Michelle unknowingly made the sacrifice that would shape the rest of her life. She stopped acting. Her last real role was a guest appearance on the Dick Van Dyke Show. After that, scripts came in, but she turned them down. Lee needed her. His drinking was getting worse. His nightmares were getting louder. And every time her agent begged her to take a role, she answered the same way. I can't leave Lee for 3 months. He needs me. Her agent warned her, Michelle, you're throwing your career away. But Michelle didn't see it that way. She wasn't giving something up. She was investing in the future she believed Lee had promised her. Meanwhile, her world grew smaller. Friends stopped inviting her out. Hollywood stopped calling. Her identity slowly dissolved into one phrase, Lee Marvin's woman. But she held on, believing the wedding would come, believing loyalty would be rewarded, believing 6 years of devotion would one day mean something, and that belief, that blind faith, would eventually become the very thing that destroyed her. By late 1969, the golden years were already cracking, quietly, subtly, like hairline fractures in glass that no one notices until the whole thing shatters. Michelle had given Lee 6 years of devotion, 6 years of caretaking, sacrifice, and a belief, almost religious, that marriage was only a matter of when, never if. But fate had other plans, and it arrived in the form of a 28-year-old brunette named Pamela Feely. She worked on the set of Monty Walsh as a production assistant, bright, eager, and everything Michelle used to be before years of waiting, hoping, and putting her life on hold. She represented youth, possibility, and a version of womanhood Michelle feared she'd already lost. At first, Michelle didn't notice. Lee was always friendly with crew members. He was generous, charming, charismatic when he wanted to be. But then came the small signs, the ones that whisper before they scream. Late-night phone calls he took outside, sudden agent meetings that lasted entire weekends, unexplained restaurant receipts, hotel charges in cities Michelle hadn't visited, and a lipstick in his car, the wrong shade, the wrong brand, the wrong woman her friends noticed before she did. Have you met Pamela? One asked softly at a party. Who exactly? Michelle replied, forced smile trembling at the corners. Then came December 1969, the Christmas party at Lee's agent's house. The night Michelle's denial finally collided with reality. Across the room, she watched Lee talking to Pamela at the bar, leaning in too closely, laughing with a warmth he hadn't shown her in months. It wasn't what they were doing, it was how Lee looked at her, familiar, comfortable, interested. The drive home was suffocating. Who is she? Michelle asked. Lee kept his eyes on the road. Who? Pamela, the brunette, the one from the crew. She's nobody, he muttered. Then why, Michelle whispered, voice breaking, did you look at her like somebody? Silence. A silence more damning than any confession. From January to October 1970, the relationship became a living funeral. A slow, painful unraveling where both knew the truth, but neither would say it aloud. Michelle tried everything. cooking his favorite meals, wearing the dresses he liked, slipping the word marriage into conversations with a desperation she hated in herself. But each attempt only pushed Lee further away. By October 10th, 1970, the dam finally broke. Michelle confronted him outright. And for the first time in 6 years, Lee didn't deny anything. He simply nodded. "How long?" she demanded. "Does it matter?" he said softly. "Yes, Lee, it matters. 6 years matters." And then came the conversation that would scar them forever. The one where Michelle begged him to acknowledge the promises he'd made, and Lee insisted those promises had never existed. "You never loved me," she whispered. Lee hesitated, then delivered a truth sharper than any knife. "I cared about you. I still do. But I never loved you the way you needed, and that's not my fault." Michelle slapped him hard, her palms stinging, her heart splitting. He didn't react. 5 days later, October 15th, 1970, he returned with a lawyer and an eviction notice. 30 days to leave the home she'd devoted her youth to, the home she believed would someday be hers. It was the moment the heartbreak ended, and the real war began. When Lee Marvin walked out of that Malibu beach house, suitcase in hand and guilt hidden under layers of cold detachment, Michelle Triola did not just lose a lover. She lost the center of her world. And when he married Pamela Feely in a rushed Las Vegas ceremony on a cold January day, the wound didn't just deepen, it ruptured. That same day, Michelle attempted suicide. Pills, vodka. A neighbor found her just in time. She survived, but something inside her didn't. For the next 18 months, Michelle drifted through life like a ghost, tethered to nothing. Her agent dropped her. No studio wanted to hire the woman associated with Hollywood's most humiliating breakup. Her savings evaporated. Her friends stopped answering her calls, drained by her sadness, uncertain how to help. She'd gone from living in a Malibu mansion to using credit cards to buy groceries to borrowing money from friends who were running out of patience. She was alone, broke, forgotten, and then into this brokenness walked a man who would change everything, Marvin Mitchelson, a flamboyant, fearless attorney with the showmanship of a magician and the ambition of a general preparing for war. A friend mentioned him casually. "He specializes in divorce," she said. "I wasn't married," Michelle replied bitterly. "Tell him anyway." Mitchelson's office was a stage. Art Deco furniture, polished floors, law degrees displayed like movie posters. He listened to Michelle's story with predatory calm. The 6 years of devotion, the name change, the eviction, the sudden marriage to Pamela, the suicide attempt, every detail, every sacrifice, every humiliation. Then he smiled. Not kindly, not sympathetically, but like a man who had just spotted an opportunity glittering in the dark. "Miss Triola," he said slowly, "I'm going to make you famous, and I'm going to make Lee Marvin pay." Michelle stared at him, stunned. "For breaking my heart?" "No," he chuckled, "for breaking an implied contract." "A contract?" she whispered. "The one you lived by for 6 years," he replied. "The law doesn't recognize it yet, but it will, once we're done." And with that, the match was struck. March 1972. Press conference. Cameras crowded around Mitchelson and Michelle. He spoke like a prosecutor giving the opening statement in a murder trial. "We are filing a landmark lawsuit against Lee Marvin. My client seeks $1.8 million for 6 years of cohabitation under an implied agreement of support." The reporters exploded. They weren't married. Hollywood froze. The lawsuit demanded $1,800 per month in support, 50% of Lee's earnings from 1964-1970. Legal fees, court costs, total $3.6 million. Lee Marvin's response was swift. Through his lawyer, "This is extortion." And just like that, Michelle Triola became the most feared woman in Hollywood. Not because she was powerful, but because she had nothing left to lose. Within days, Warren Beatty rushed to marry Annette Bening. Jack Nicholson started requiring legal agreements before girlfriends moved in. Every bachelor in Hollywood hired a lawyer. Michelle Triola wasn't just a woman anymore. She was a warning. For Lee Marvin, the real battle had just begun, and over the next 7 years, it would cost him his money, his peace, his marriage, and eventually his sense of who he was. What followed wasn't just a lawsuit. It was a siege, a 7-year scorched earth legal war that drained both Lee Marvin and Michelle Triola of money, dignity, hope, and eventually the very identities they once held on to. Before a jury ever heard a single word, before a judge ever entered a courtroom, both sides were already bleeding. The pretrial phase became the battlefield for 6 years straight. Depositions, subpoenas, motions, counter-motions, character attacks, financial autopsies, psychological warfare. It was law at its ugliest. Michelle's team attacked first. Michelson demanded everything: tax records, business contracts, personal letters, bank statements, photos from every vacation, testimonies from dinner guests, housekeepers, agents, actors, even waiters who had served them at restaurants. He built a case out of memories, receipts, witnesses' whispers. Witnesses stated, Lee introduced Michelle as my wife. He promised marriage when the time is right. Michelle had turned down work because Lee needed her. They shared a life indistinguishable from marriage. Even Michael Douglas testified. He remembered having dinner at the Malibu house. Lee introduced Michelle simply as my wife, Michelle. It was damning, powerful, human. Lee's team retaliated with brutality. They tore into Michelle's past. Old boyfriends, missed auditions, failed screen tests, all dragged into the light. They painted her as an opportunist, a woman who saw a wealthy actor and plotted a future built on his money. They found proof she'd been struggling before she ever met Lee. They argued she had no career to sacrifice. It was cruel, cold, strategic, and it destroyed her emotionally. The financial toll grew monstrous. Lee Marvin's legal bills skyrocketed. $50,000, $100,000, $150,000, then more. Michelle drowned in debt. Loans, maxed out credit cards, borrowed money from friends, lawyers working on contingency because she couldn't pay them at all. At one point, she lived on food stamps. The woman who once slept in a Malibu beach house now stood in grocery lines with government assistance, and Hollywood wouldn't touch her. She had become radioactive, a symbol of legal danger no studio wanted near a production. Lee wasn't spared either. The stress was destroying him. The drinking worsened, the PTSD flared, the nightmares returned. His marriage to Pamela began to crack. Studios saw him as the lawsuit guy, not the tough leading man. His career sank. Offers dropped from $200,000 a film to $50,000 to nothing worth the trouble. Both of them, once lovers, were now prisoners of a war they couldn't escape. By 1976, mutual friends begged them to settle. Lee, just give her something. End this. I'm not rewarding blackmail. Michelle, take something, anything, and move on. This isn't about money, it's about what he owes me. Pride had replaced love. Revenge had replaced reason. and the lawyers, the only winners, kept the fire burning. It took 6 long years before a date was finally set. January 9th, 1979, Los Angeles Superior Court, Department 57. After nearly a decade, Lee Marvin and Michelle Triola would finally face each other again. But what awaited them inside that courtroom would be even more devastating than anything that came before. January 9th, 1979, Los Angeles Superior Court, Department 57. The world called it a trial, but to anyone in the courtroom that day, it felt more like an autopsy. 2 former lovers dissecting the corpse of a 6-year relationship, piece by painful piece, while the entire nation watched. Outside the courthouse, chaos reigned. Reporters elbowing each other for camera angles, feminist groups holding signs declaring women's work has value, men's rights activists shouting no marriage, no money, tabloids ready to feast on every tear, every tremble, every word. Inside, however, was silence, a silence thick enough to crush breath. Lee Marvin entered first, 60 years old now. Older, lean, hair graying at the temples. The once indestructible Hollywood tough guy now looked like a man exhausted from fighting wars both real and imagined. He walked as stiffly as if every step carried the weight of the past decade. Then came Michelle, 45, graceful in a simple dress she could barely afford. No diamonds, no glamour, just the look of a woman stripped down to her last ounce of dignity. She had been beautiful once, radiantly so, but years of emotional warfare had weathered her like an old Hollywood photograph left too long in the sun. They sat 30 feet apart. Not once did they look at each other. 9 years had passed since that night in Malibu. 9 years since the words "get out." 9 years since 2 people destroyed everything they ever shared. And now they were here, forced into the same room by a legal battle neither could walk away from. Judge Arthur Marshall, 70-ish, entered with the weariness of a man who had seen every possible shade of human cruelty. He looked at Lee, at Michelle, at the army of lawyers. Then he sighed, the kind of sigh only judges and widowers ever master. "Mr. Mitchelson," he said, "you may begin." Mitchelson rose like a performer stepping into a spotlight. His voice boomed. "This case is simple. For 6 years, Michelle Triola sacrificed everything. Her career, her identity, her youth, based on the explicit promises of Lee Marvin. He paced deliberately, letting each word echo. He promised marriage. He promised support. He promised a life together. Then he pointed at Lee with a theatrical flourish. He made promises. He benefited from those promises. And then he broke them. He cast his voice toward the judge and gallery. This is not about marriage. It is about justice. The room stirred. Lee's attorney, David Kagan, responded like a surgeon. Calm, surgical, lethal. "Your Honor," he began, "this case is indeed simple, but not for the reasons Mr. Mitchelson claims." He gestured to Michelle without warmth. "This is about a woman who enjoyed the benefits of dating a movie star and now expects to be compensated as though she had been his wife." He let the silence fall, heavy and sharp. "She wants money for living in a beautiful home, for traveling the world, for attending premieres and parties." He turned to the judge. "She calls that sacrifice. Most people call it winning the lottery." A soft gasp swept across the room. With just 2 opening statements, the tone was set. This trial wasn't just about 2 lives. It was about gender, power, money, the invisible labor of women, the fear of men. the meaning of partnership in a world without marriage licenses. Every woman in the courtroom saw herself in Michelle. Every man feared becoming Lee. And then the judge spoke. Call your first witness. But the first witness wasn't a friend or a colleague or a housekeeper. It was Michelle herself. She stood, walked to the stand, raised her hand, and swore to tell the truth. And for the next 3 days, she would reveal the intimate, painful details of her life with Lee Marvin, details that would shake the courtroom, the media, and ultimately, Lee himself. The autopsy of their love story had officially begun. When Michelle Triola took the stand, the courtroom shifted. For 3 days, every breath, every tremble, every whispered memory would become evidence, not just in a legal case, but in the emotional history of two people who once believed they had a future. She began softly, almost apologetically. We met in 1964 on the set of Ship of Fools. Her voice carried a blend of nostalgia and regret. She spoke about how Lee approached her, how he made her feel seen, safe, chosen. She described the early days with a gentle warmth that momentarily softened the courtroom, but as she continued, the cracks began to show. Mitchelson guided her carefully. When did you first discuss marriage? 6 months after I moved in, she said. He said there was no rush, that we had time. Did he promise to marry you? Yes, she answered, with a break in her voice. Many times. He always said, when the time is right. The courtroom scribbled. Reporters leaned forward. Even Lee, sitting stiffly at the defendant's table, blinked slowly, as if hearing these memories out loud brought a long-forgotten ghost back to life. Michelle described the name change. I became Michelle Triola Marvin, she said, legally, on my driver's license, my bank accounts, everything. Why? Mitchelson asked. Because I believed we were married in every way that mattered. Then came the sacrifice. She told the court she had turned down roles, The Graduate, TV shows, series work, guest spots. I couldn't leave Lee for months at a time, she said. He needed me, and wives support their husbands. Her voice cracked, not theatrically, but with the weight of years. She described the war nightmares, the shrapnel under his skin, the drinking, the nights he woke up screaming in Japanese. She had anchored him, held him together when his demons threatened to tear him apart. Then Mitchelson introduced evidence, photos of Lee and Michelle at events, magazine clippings referring to her as Mrs. Marvin, bank statements showing joint financial activity, witnesses who swore they heard Lee call her his wife. It painted a picture that was vivid, human, aching with truth. And then came the most painful part, the collapse of her career. My agent stopped calling, she whispered. I lost every opportunity. I wasn't Michelle anymore. I was Lee's shadow. Her hands trembled on the witness stand. She wiped tears that had nothing to do with performance. For 3 days, she spoke as a woman who had given 6 years, her youth, her dreams, her identity, and received nothing but an eviction notice. The courtroom was silent. Even those who doubted her motives, even those who believed this case was a slippery legal slope, could feel the raw truth in her pain. Michelle finished her testimony with a sentence that hung in the air like a funeral bell. I truly believed we were going to be married. I truly believed we were a family. And as she stepped down from the stand, the energy in the courtroom shifted again, because now it was Lee Marvin's turn to speak. And what he said next would ignite a firestorm felt across America. If Michelle's testimony was a slow bleed of heartbreak, Then Lee Marvin's was a clean surgical incision, sharp, cold, and devastatingly final. He walked to the stand like a man heading toward a firing squad, jaw clenched, steps heavy. Not the swaggering Hollywood tough guy, not the war hero, just a tired, aging man about to face the consequences of his own past. David Kagan began, his voice steady, calm, emotionless. Mr. Marvin, did you ever promise to marry Michelle Triola? Lee didn't blink. No. A ripple went through the room. But did you ever say you would marry her? Kagan pressed. I might have said, maybe someday. That's conversation, not a promise. His tone was chillingly factual, detached, almost clinical, like he was diagnosing rather than remembering. On the subject of calling her his wife, did you introduce her as your wife? Socially, Lee admitted. Sometimes it was easier than explaining, but legally, never. I never filed taxes as married, never put her on insurance, never claimed her as a spouse. The courtroom felt Michelle recoil as if struck. Then came the name change. Did you ask her to take your name? No, he said flatly. She did it on her own. Did you tell her not to? Yes, Lee replied. I told her it was too serious. She did it anyway. Michelle covered her mouth. Her shoulders shook. Then came the question that silenced the room. Did Michelle sacrifice her career for you? Lee hesitated for the first time. He looked at her, truly looked at her, for the first time in years. She didn't have a career to sacrifice. The room gasped audibly. Michelle collapsed forward, choking on sobs. The judge immediately called a recess. Even Lee's own lawyer exhaled sharply. Jesus, Lee, true or not, that was cruel. Lee stared down at his hands. True isn't always smart, he muttered. That single line, she had no career to sacrifice, exploded into headlines across America. For many, it painted Lee Marvin as a heartless brute. For others, it framed Michelle as an opportunist. But the cross-examination was the real bloodbath. Mitchelson's voice cut the air like a blade. Mr. Marvin, did you use Michelle Triola? Used, Lee scoffed. I gave her a home, money, travel, experiences. That's not using, that's providing. Mitchelson stepped closer. And after 6 years, did you discard her? I ended a relationship, Lee said sharply. Adults do that. With eviction papers? With legal clarification, Lee snapped. She had no claim to my home, to my earnings, to anything. The gallery whispered. Some stared at Lee with disgust, others with pity. Then came the fatal question. You didn't love her, did you? Lee's jaw tightened. He inhaled slowly, looked at Michelle, longer this time. I loved who I thought she was, he said quietly, before she became obsessed with what she believed I owed her. It was the closest thing to honesty he'd offered all trial, and the most devastating. Michelle froze, her face drained of color. The courtroom went still. Two people who once shared a life, a home, a future, now stood on opposite sides of a truth neither wanted to admit. Their love wasn't just broken. It had been doomed from the start. And the worst was yet to come. Because next, the judge would deliver a verdict that shocked both sides and changed Hollywood forever.